Perfect. Well, a warm welcome to everyone and hello from sunny Lisbon in Portugal. My name is Nuno Agdassi, and I'm pleased to be hosting you for this ISASI Focus On webinar, this time dedicated to investigating ATC events. So the ISASI committee chose this topic because of some, well, very high profile ATC accidents recently, other events which have been investigated, others which are ongoing. And ATC events are relevant because, well, when things do go wrong, normally you have catastrophic consequences. So this is why we chose this topic. And for the next 2 hours, we will be speaking with some experts. We will be crisscrossing Europe, much like the plot of a Bond movie, but this time without the Bond girls. Okay, and so we have an excellent host of speakers instead, who will be sharing with us their insights and also their experience on this important topic. So without further ado, please let's get started with the program. And I would like to introduce our first speaker. It's Mr. Ian Petranik from Flight Radar 24. He is Director of Communications. As you know, Flight Radar 24 is the world leading provider of real-time flight tracking. And so in this role, Ian oversees global communication strategy, media relations, and public engagements for this platform. He also co-hosts Flight Radar 24's aviation podcast, AvTalk. And in addition to this, he regularly collaborates with international media outlets, industry stakeholders, and offers informed analysis on airline operations, safety, and air traffic trends. So it's very relevant that we hear from Ian, and I would like to hand over to him for our first presentation today. Over to you, Ian. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so very much for having me. It's a privilege to speak with you all. I will go ahead and share here and hope that you can all see this okay.
Very good.
Excellent. As Nuno mentioned, I am the Director of Communications at Flight Radar 24. We are a global flight tracking service with the goal of making sure that we have knowledge of every live flight around the world and continuing to work towards that goal. So I thought what we could do is start with what is ADS-B. I'm sure that most of you are probably familiar with ADS-B and have worked with ADS-B data, but just so that we're all working from the same reference, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. So automatic, the data is sent without pilot input or action. Once the transponder is on, the data is ready to go. Dependent because it requires a GNSS signal for those position updates. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happens when that's not available in a moment. Surveillance is the one that requires least explanation. It's just knowing where the aircraft is. And then broadcast is the signal is broadcast in the blind no matter what, no matter if anyone's there to receive it or not. So what is Flight Radar 24? We are a global flight tracking service that has been building since 2007 a network of terrestrial ADS-B receivers all around the world. We've passed 55,000 terrestrial receivers on all 7 continents. We're actually activating, hopefully this week, our first receiver at the geographic South Pole. So looking forward to that one. But through that network, we're tracking more than nearly 300,000 flights per day, as well as using a number of other sources for tracking those particular aircraft. We collect the data through our own receivers. So we operate a program in which we send this receiver kit that you see on the screen to users of Flight Radar 24 or interested parties who wish to host an ADS-B receiver, either just to contribute to Flight Radar 24's flight tracking or to improve their own situation and their own surveillance capabilities, whether those are airports, airlines, flight schools, and so on and so forth. So we will send this kit out, which includes the computer receiver, a ADS-B antenna for 1090 megahertz, a GPS antenna. We've also recently begun sending out dual band receiver kits that include 978 megahertz as well to track aircraft on that UAT band, mostly in the US, but there are some expanding use cases for that as well. In addition to the receiver kit that we send out, we also have thousands of home-built receivers or up to professionally built receivers that are connected to our network. Those are folks who have followed either our instructions or readily available instructions for building an ADS-B receiver at home and have connected those receivers to our network so that they're able to share data with us. We also use a few satellite-based resources, including ADS-C data, as well as actual satellite-based ADS-B to supplement our terrestrial coverage. And then we also take in data from external sources that includes national and regional ANSPs, as well as different regulators and then commercial schedule providers and the like to further supplement that data. I'd like to talk now about some of the online tools that Flight Radar 24 offers so that you can access Flight Radar 24 data while working online without having to take anything offline. These are quick and I hope helpful ways to get an easy overview and situational analysis. So one of the first things that we have available is called Global Playback, and that's accessible on the main Flight Radar 24 website. That allows you to play back all of the air traffic in the region at a given time. So you click on Playback and then select the date and time in UTC so that you are able to see a moving map, or you can pause it and view still of anything that may have occurred and get an easy overview of the situation at any given time. A recent example for use of playback was the AirProx incident in Los Angeles, California, I believe the end of October. So on the 31st of October, there was an ITA Airways flight and an American Airlines flight that were both departing Los Angeles. The ITA Airways flight made a turn that was off the SID, and therefore air traffic control had to get involved. It's fairly simple to just enter playback, and you're able to select multiple aircraft so you can watch and see without having to get into too much data too quickly, whether or not there's something visible there. And it also creates a stark visualization, if necessary, for visualizing some of that data that you might want to download later on and look at more thoroughly. We also offer downloadable self-service data for individual flights. This example was the recent runway excursion in Hong Kong, where you can download both a CSV and KML file. The CSV file I will show in just a minute, and an example KML file as well. But these are what we call standard CSV and KML files that include the data that's displayed on the website, not the more granular data that I'll share in just a moment. But this is what one of these standard CSV files looks like. It includes a timestamp, both in Unix epoch format and also human readable UTC, the call sign broadcast by the aircraft, the position in latitude and longitude, the altitude, speed, ground speed, and then direction of the aircraft. So these are one-click downloads that you can download for any individual flight. And this will include all the positions in standard format that we received for that particular flight. KML files are usable in any 3D mapping program, Google Earth being the most common usage. We find that these are particularly useful for comparison flights. Here I've used the Swiftair 737 from Vilnius, where we note that these are previous landing paths for the other aircraft, as well as the incident aircraft shown. So KML files offer a way to I think, quickly visualize just comparative data, and they're also one-click download. So it's easy to take that data and see something at a glance. Moving beyond data at a glance, we get into what we really find valuable when working with accident investigators and anyone who's interested in what the data is actually telling us beyond a quick glance. So we offer two products. One is events data. So that's a list of historical events or a list of historical flights meeting certain event criteria. So when we say events, we mean takeoff, landing, cruise, hold, diversions, and the like. And those, along with the positions data that we offer, so historical flights meeting selected criteria, like I have listed on the slide. So you can search by airline, airport, route, aircraft type. By aircraft category, we mean cargo, passenger, military, and government. We can search by country. So if you're interested in all of the flights that arrived or departed from a particular country or entered a particular FIR, that's available too. These are often helpful when looking at pattern analyses and when you need a bulk set of data. So if you need hundreds or thousands of examples of a particular flight or a particular route or something of that nature. We also offer what we call granular data. So ADS-B sends the data from both the top and bottom antenna roughly once per second. So we get 2 frames per second, mostly, from aircraft in good coverage. That data is all saved. It's not shown on our website because showing that amount of data on the website would lead to the website being unusable. But what we do have is that data available for download. That data is available on request, and I'll put some information at the end of the presentation on how to request that data. But that provides 2 sets of data. We can either provide the raw decoded ADS-B data that's collected by just the Flight Radar 24 receivers. So those are the receivers that we build, design, and then send out. And that shows individual ADS-B frames and includes all the data seen by those receivers that have seen that aircraft. We also offer what we call multi-source data. So that is the processed at our network. It includes the same high frequency, but it also includes data from our ADS-B receivers, all of the software receivers, the home-built receivers that people have connected to the Flight Radar 24 network, all of the MLAT data that we process, as well as selected other external data sources like ADS-C or certain satellite-based operators and other partners that we have that supply some ADS-B data to us. The always available fields are included in every granular export. So that I believe this presentation can be shared, so I don't have to necessarily run through all of them, but I will focus on some that have been certainly helpful for investigations previously. Vertical speed is one that provides us with almost instantaneous look at any event where a dive or a climb is being looked into, and that's the vertical speed that's instantaneously reported by the aircraft and then reported by our receivers. The NIC is the navigation integrity category. So that tells us whether or not the aircraft believes its position that it's reporting. And that allows us to do a lot of work on GPS interference or GNSS interference generally. Whether or not those aircraft are experiencing position degradation or are experiencing any interference whatsoever, whether it's jamming or spoofing or the like. And then also listed will be the position source. So whether that's an ADS-B position, an MLAT position that we've calculated ourselves, and so on. The dependent fields that are available in the granular data are dependent on ground station interrogation. So these will generally be available now that most ATC ground stations are interrogating the full breadth of the ADS-B fields, but there are some that don't. So emergency status is the aircraft squawking 7,700 basically. MCP altitude and FMS altitude are the altitudes entered into the autopilot and the FMS. GPS altitude is generally available across the board. That's one that we're able to calculate based on the ADS-B data as well. That sent out the barometric altitude, so we can calculate the GPS altitude. TCAS status, so we have the ability to detect the aircraft's, is TCAS active? Is it inactive, or is there an active RA? And that's shown in a bitmap within that field. Airspeed values, heading, roll, the autopilot heading versus track, outside air temperature, wind, and the QNH entered by the crew are also available when they are requested by the ground stations. Working with granular data, what the granular data looks like is a very, 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 very long CSV file, depending on how long the flight is. So an Emirates A380 flying from Dubai to Los Angeles is tens, if not hundreds of thousands of flights. And what this looks like is row upon row upon row of the data. So we have everything broken into columns, and you're certainly able to work with this data and sort it as necessary. You can see some of the sourcing in column O. So that tells us which receiver it's coming from and how that was calculated. One of the things that we've been dealing with for the past few years that has led to a lot of work on our end with both the ADS-B data and being able to try and visualize it that I thought might be helpful for this group is the GNSS interference that we've seen, certainly rising in very specific locations, but generally worldwide, unfortunately. So we have a map that shows the intensity and location of GPS interference. We don't distinguish on this particular map between spoofing and just standard jamming, but we show it in 24 hours each day, but we also have 6-hour increments. So you can go back and look at chunks of time and see how that's changed over the course of the day and going back. This goes back to November of 2023 at the moment, this particular data set. So we're able to look back and see the changes over time of the areas and intensity of GNSS interference. One of the things that we've really focused on over the past year or so has been calculating MLAT, so multilateration, using the known position of our receivers against the uncertain position of the aircraft's transponder to calculate an actual track. This was a flight that, I believe it was a LOP flight from Warsaw to Paris that experienced a wide range of GPS interference, including spoofing and jamming. So the purple tracks are the ADS-B data that we receive from the aircraft. The green track is the MLAT data that we were able to calculate based on the position of our receivers. Some of the limitations of ADS-B data. There are some significant limitations as far as accident investigations are concerned. And certainly ADSB data is no substitute for having the flight data recorders. But it can be very helpful in the beginnings of an investigation for sure. And if you don't have access to those recorders, certainly. Data availability depends on coverage. So for Flight Radar 24, we have most terrestrial space covered, at least in cruise and higher altitudes. Ground level coverage is relevant or available in most major metro areas, certainly across Europe. We have very good ground level coverage at most major airports in Europe. I would say all major airports in Europe, and then most secondary and tertiary airports as well. But it does depend on receivers in the area. External interference can impact utility. What I mean by that is when we're looking at GPS jamming or spoofing, if we're not able to calculate MLAT, we need 3 receivers in the area to calculate MLAT. And if we don't have those receivers, or if the receivers aren't particularly well placed in the area, some of that can still leak through, and we're unable to calculate a good MLAT track. The third thing I wanted to mention is that the design of the ADSB parameters are designed with technical economy in mind. So for instance, altitude reporting is based in 25-foot increments. So there's certainly a margin of error in certain fields. Positional information is not limited in its precision, but certain other fields are, like altitude, vertical speed, and so on. So that's just something to be mindful of when you're working with ADSB data. For data requests from Flight Radar 24, we have a press in media center inbox that goes to multiple people within Flight Radar 24, myself included. If you have urgent inquiries, please feel free to send us a message, whether it's urgent or not, if you prefer to go that route. But urgent inquiries should be directed there so that someone, no matter who's awake and who's asleep at the company, somebody will be able to get to your inquiry as quickly as possible. Otherwise, please feel free to email me directly. My email address is ian@fr24.com, and we'll share this presentation as well. So if there's any questions about a specific flight, please include as much information as you have so that we can find that flight as quickly as possible and then be able to send that data on to you. If you have an inkling of something where we think something happened, or we don't necessarily know all of the aircraft involved in a particular incident, we're happy to search both through our playback and some other sources to find those aircraft if that's helpful for you. I believe that is all I had. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take those now. I'm not sure how we were going to necessarily structure the question period.
Hi, Ian. Thank you very much for your presentation and providing a comprehensive overview, not only of ADSB data, but also how it can be useful for investigations and also the limitations. So for questions, please go ahead and add your questions into the chat. I see we have a couple of questions, so I will just go over the list now. The first one is, can anyone, private, commercial, and/or government, request ADSB data?
Yes. So depending on the data that they're requesting. So the first few slides where I was referencing self-service data, that's available to anyone. Certain time periods are available based on subscription levels and things like that. But anyone can go ahead and access that data both in real time or the playback data and things like that. So it depends on who's doing the requesting based on which data is available.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Do we provide the requested information for free? For you fine people, absolutely, yes. So all of the data that I showed, as far as the granular data, which I think would be most useful in the case of an accident or incident investigation, that we will provide for free upon request. So that's just something where send us an email or an inbox query to our press and media center, and we're happy to send along the data that we have that's relevant for your investigation. Predictive analysis in flight tracks. I'm not sure what that is a reference to as far as predictive analysis.
Hi, I can. This is Deanna. I can explain a little bit.
Hi,
So
Deanna.
if I
Yeah.
have a couple of aircraft that are on a collision course, they miss each other, but if I want to try to determine at what point would they have collided, do you have that predictive analysis?
We don't have the predictive. We don't generally do predictive analysis on all data like that. But what we could do, and certainly have done in previous incidences, provide the data for both of those aircraft, and then it becomes just a question of extrapolating the last known track.
Okay, thank you.
Altitude around airports in your comparative track size, sometimes flight level and height above ground. Yes. So when downloading the KML, I should note that the ADS-B data that we receive, that standard ADS-B data, that is all reported in standard pressure above mean sea level. So it is not adjusted for QNH, and it is not adjusted for altitude above ground level. We do have the ability, knowing the QNH for the local area, and we do have the ability, knowing the elevation of the airport or the region, to calculate that data back from the ADS-B data. Often, though, what we find is that when we're dealing with situations, it's much better to have the radial altimeter data, which unfortunately is not broadcast via ADS-B. Flight MH370 and area coverage, any relationship? No, the flight was in good coverage at that point. So at that point, we just had a loss of signal, and unfortunately, not. I don't think there's much more I can say on that subject. Do we have to inform the Swiss investigation when we make a request to you? I believe that they appreciate the being copied on the email, and I'm certainly happy to copy the board, but do not feel necessarily obligated when requesting data, necessarily according to just reaching out for data. If there is specific investigative data that you need, I believe they do appreciate a heads up. How far back can the database go? March of 2024 is no problem. The further back we go, the less data we have. So we can go back to certain flights back to 2013. But for the most part, the data that we have available that I would say would be useful for any of this group would be about 2018. I can't speak to the question about AI.
Yeah, we can. I can take that offline, Ari,
Sure.
if you like. If you message me, I'll be happy to answer that. If you want to go to the next one.
Sure. Download track log files. Grab data from outside flight in detail. Oh, okay. Interesting. I'll have to take a look at that one. That seems very interesting stuff.
So I've got a few here. Maybe we can just go over them quite quickly.
Sure.
One of them is, how do you ensure quality control of the data with all the home-built units connected? So obviously the home-built units is one part of the source of data that you receive.
Yes.
And you process. But how can you really control, if you like, the quality control as the question raises?
Sure. In the case of the data that we trust our own receivers above all else. The home built receivers have a it's a trust score that builds over time because they check some against other receivers in the area, especially against our receivers. And so as someone connects their receiver to our network, they receive a unique identifier, and then over time they build that trust score. So each specific receiver has its own trust score, and we're more likely to trust certain receivers than others, which is helpful because there are often locations where our coverage is adequate, but that individual receiver might add something unique, such as ground coverage or a hole in an area where we might not have yet shipped one of our receivers.
Okay. And are you able to share data from aircraft that opt out of being displayed on your website version?
Yes. So the data that is available on the website is bound by real-time restrictions. Those restrictions do not apply to historical data.
Okay, excellent. And one from me,
Yeah.
Ian. As you know, as an industry, we're relying increasingly on satellite-based navigation and taking advantage of all the benefits that brings, right? And as a result, we're decommissioning a lot of ground-based nav aids. Now, obviously, your presentation has highlighted, and we've also noticed that as an industry, increasing GNSS interference. How can these two come together? So we're relying on a technology which presents quite a lot of vulnerabilities, right? While we're decommissioning ground aids. What are your thoughts on that?
From our perspective, we've seen the risk of decreasing reliance on ground-based navigational aids with some of the GNSS interference and positioning, knowing where the aircraft is and things of that nature. I think there's certainly a risk, and we've seen some specific examples of particular aircraft not being able to land at particular airports and things like that. While we don't unfortunately have any input into this, I would caution those that do make these decisions about decommissioning those in a way that might leave gaps to allow for interference.
Okay, excellent. And I see there's a note here from David on the chat, which talks about a recent presentation on using Flight Radar 24 data in accident investigation. Now, like David, I don't remember whether it was eSASE or iSASE, but normally this material is available online. So if you would like to search for it, or if anyone else remembers, it'd be great to have that. Okay, one last question from Andrew. I'm conscious we're going a little bit over. So Andrew is asking, oh, you see the question, Ian. If you could just ask the final question, please.
Opted out, shown at all time in real time. So it depends on the opting out that they have done. For the vast majority of aircraft that have asked not to have their data displayed in real time, what we do is we show the aircraft's real-time position with the all of the identifying characteristics removed except the aircraft type. So that's you'll see say it's a Gulfstream G650ER, you'll see GLF6, and it will just be there without any other identifying characteristics.
Okay, excellent. Ian, thank you very much for your presentation and
thank you
for
all.
sharing your insights with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I'm happy to take further questions either in the chat directly or via email at a later time. Absolutely.
Excellent. And everyone, you saw Ian's email there, so he's the point of contact in case you wish to request this kind of data from Flight Radar 24, or if you have any further questions. Excellent. Thanks very much, Ian. So moving on in the program, as we cross Europe from Sweden to Germany in our imaginary Aston Martin, our next speaker is a distinguished member of the aviation safety community in Europe. His name is Royce, Johan Royce. And Johan is a retired civil aviation accident investigator with 37 years of experience as an IIC and an accredited representative. And as part of that, he was 5 years director of the BFU in Germany. So he's had a demonstrated history of working in safety and accident investigation. And he's here to give us his valuable experience and insights of investigating ATC events. And I'm sure we can learn a lot from him. So over to you, Johan.
Thank you very much, Nuno. Thank you very much to Isasi inviting me for this presentation because it's very interesting for me to talk to so many colleagues and to talk about these investigating air traffic events and to share experience. I think that's an important point. And for this reason, I decided to present a presentation with the headline ATC-related investigations and regulatory requirements and practical experience. I think one of the most important part is the experience. Good afternoon to all of you, and good morning or good evening wherever you are. It is, as I said, honor for me to talk with you this afternoon. What are we talking about? You can see on the slide some examples. One example, in 2001, it was a runway incursion in Italy, in Milan Linate. It was a collision, a ground collision of two aircraft. McDonnell Douglas aircraft was on a takeoff run, and a German registered Cessna Citation crossed the runway at that time, and it came to a collision with 118 fatalities. Another very high-profile occurrence and high-profile investigation was the mid-air collision we had in Germany in its beginning of 2002. It was a collision in the air between a Boeing 757 freighter and a Tupolev, and 71 fatalities. After these occurrences, it was something like a key change, how to deal with ATC-related occurrences regarding the investigation. We at BFU in Germany decided, and it was the same with the colleagues in Switzerland, the colleagues in France, and the colleagues in Great Britain, to investigate as much as possible serious incidents. Where ATC could have been involved or was involved. And the third example you can see on this slide is a VO-off of a Boeing 777 during or just after touchdown. VO-off the runway to one side and came back to the other side. The root cause was not ATC, but it was also ATC related. And so this is one example of an investigation of a serious incident. And also it makes sense to investigate incidents. And the fourth example you can see on my slide it's just a copy of a BFU report or a photo of the BFU report. And you can see an Airbus aircraft and a glider. The Airbus was approaching to Hamburg, and the glider was 15.9 meters away of the Airbus. I think we are all of the opinion that this was also a serious incident, and we had to investigate. I know there are a high number of additional investigations over the last 25 years. My colleagues for the following presentations, Mark and Daniel, I think they will present several interesting cases. What I will do, I will just go back to basics, to some experience we made during the last 25 years in this area of the investigation. And the agenda for the following presentation is, after some general aspects, I will explain what the rights and obligation for us as investigators are by our regulations, by ICAO Annex 13, by EU 996. And then I will change over to some practice and experience from investigations, and finally some conclusions. Let us start me with a question, because I am asking this question in every investigation training I am doing in Grenfell. I do it since more than 20 years, and I have half a day available to present the Überlingen accident and to go a bit more into details. I'm always starting with this question. And the question is an investigation in the ATC area a special investigation for Annex 13 investigations? And most of the answers are yes, it is. And if I'm asking why, the answer will be ATC is like a black box, or my background is a pilot and I'm not familiar with ATC aspects, or my background is an engineer and something like that. My answer is no and yes. Why no? Because the ATC area is a part of our aviation system. And so we have to investigate. And I think the Milano and also the Überlingen accident and most of the serious incidents we investigated explain it very well, that ATC is a part of the aviation system. The part of my answer, yes. The next or the following question is, are we able to do it? Do we have the knowledge? Do we have the experience? I would say we as investigators, we are allowed to ask questions, and we are trained how to deal with areas where we are not familiar with. And so, yes, we can, or every investigator, trained investigator, can do this part of the investigation, but there are also limits. We have to accept there are limits, and after reaching these limits, we have to include specialists. I will come to some ideas on this issue later. In an investigation, ATC-related investigation, finally we will have the Annex 13, the official safety investigation report. Responsible are the investigation authorities. We have access to almost everything according to ICAO Annex 13 and 996. Regarding the independence, the independence is complete. And we are able to issue safety recommendation, and the final report is available for the public. Nowadays, according to ICAO, to ICAO Annex 11, the air navigation service providers, they have also to conduct an investigation, and this is an internal investigation. They have access to their internal information, but they do not have access, for example, to pilots or other involved people outside of their area. And the independence is, in my understanding, partial, because most of the investigators, they are independent from the operational part of an air navigation service provider, but it is not comparable with the independence we have as investigators according to ICAO 13. Safety recommendation in some internal safety actions, they do it. And they also are writing a internal final report, in most cases also for SMS purposes. It is possible to share if we are talking about facts, but in many cases we do not get the internal investigations, the internal investigation report. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. But if we would like to get information from these internal reports, we can do it on a factual basis, but not more. ATC actions often influence accident sequences. And what I mean is, if we are talking about runway incursion, loss of separation, CFIT, or incorrect altitude assignments, wrong runway use, breakdown of coordination between sectors, FIRs, communication and misunderstandings, surveillance and technology failures, yes, ATC can help us, and we can get information from the ATC in a very similar way as Ian just told it about Flight Radar 24. Factual information is available, and we can get this factual information, even without controller errors. And if there's a controller error, it is interesting to identify the answer why failed the controller. And if we get the answer why a controller failed, then we are on a systemic level. And this is important, because if we have some systemic issues, we learn it from a single investigation, and we distribute it to the world via reports, via safety recommendation, then we can improve safety. We can do ATC investigations in a deeper way. We can go into procedural weaknesses, workload and staffing issues. That's in many cases an interesting discussion after occurrences during the last years. And there are maybe technology limitations, problems with their technical systems like radar or navigation system, phraseologic deviation, and human factors challenging. As we know, human factors is a really, really important aspect, and it is very similar to human factors investigation we do with pilots, or we have to do with pilots involved. Coordination gaps between units or FIRs and systemic organizational failures. That means we can investigate everything what we need to understand what happened and why could it happen. And the outputs can be safety recommendations, if we are able to issue safety recommendations, we are on the way, or it is a way to reduce risk for the entire aviation system. The Italy Milan investigation and also the Überling investigation, in my understanding, are really, really good examples, because the outputs were a lot of safety recommendations for global interest. Some issues regarding the human factors investigation, because it can be a challenge. Investigating ATC involves detailed human factors elements, as we have it also with pilots. It's very, very similar, but to get this information, to talk to the involved controllers, it might be a bit more difficult, because that is something, sometimes it is really like a black box, and we have to open this black box. And we have to deal with the controller's workload, traffic complexity, situational awareness, fatigue, supervisor support, distraction or interruptions, team dynamics in multi-position operations, cognitive overload in peak traffic periods. And what does it mean? I said it can be a challenge. And the next question is, who can do this human factors investigation? In my experience, every investigator should be able to do and to conduct a human factors investigation. But it can happen that we have to go very deep into details, and then there's a need to have specialists and to have special trained investigators or investigators with a zoological and human factors background. And it is important to note that these investigation methods are very similar to the investigations we are doing in the cockpit, only the environment is different. And another challenge is, if I would compare the investigations we had to do within the last 5 years with investigations we did 20, 25, 30 years ago, it has changed because in previous time, we had just to deal with ICAO standards. We had to check the compliance with ICAO standards, and maybe we had to check manuals for the controllers. And nowadays, we have to deal with a lot of regulations and procedures. For example, the Single European Sky Framework, EASA ATM requirements, for example, SERA, or national air navigation service provider procedures, local tower sector instruction, military ATC operation, and a lot of framework and a lot of different type of regulations. That means it is a lot of work we have to do, but it is possible. It is possible, and we have to navigate through the multiple layers of regulations. The next topic is regarding the independence of the investigation. It is important that the Annex 13 investigation is completely independent from all other investigations, independent from the air navigation service provider, independent from the regulator and the operator involved. And it is also important that the investigation, Annex 13 investigation should be free from external pressure, like political, judicial, ANSP or regulatory influences. But that is always the case. That is always the case in a high-profile investigation and also in other investigations. And the way is always to understand what happened and why could it happen. And so we have to include the ATC area in the same way as we would include an operator, the operator of the aircraft. We have some obligations, we have some rights, and one aspect is that the investigation, the ANS, air navigation service providers, they have to report the occurrences to the investigation authorities. The investigation authorities, they can decide, is there a need to investigate? Is it, or has it to be classified as an accident, as a serious incident, or just an incident? If it is just an incident, in most cases, the investigation authorities will not conduct an investigation, but an internal investigation can be conducted under the responsibility of the air navigation service provider. Nevertheless, we as Annex 13 investigators, we have access to all voice recordings, to ATC voice recordings, recordings between controller and pilot, intercom, coordination lines, and so on. And we are allowed to get the transcripts of the communication, to get the radar data from the different types. In addition to that, nowadays we can also use Flight Radar 24, as Ian explained it before. According to my experience, sometimes it's easier to get the radar data first from Flight Radar 24 because it's faster. It takes a bit more time if we are asking the navigation service providers, but we will have access. Flight progress strips, maybe on paper or nowadays in an electronic way. also ATC logs, shift plans, duty rosters, and logs about the systems and like alarms, degraded modes, and so on. And according to ICAO 13, the state and the investigation authorities, they have to protect these data in case of an investigation. Very similar, according to 996, EU Regulation 996, the air navigation service providers must provide investigators immediate access to controllers and supervisors, ATC system and workstations, system logs and maintenance records, training records, and licensing information. It is very clear that we are allowed to get this information. I know in practical, it is sometimes a bit more difficult because to get access to the controller, if there was, for example, an occurrence during the night shift and next morning we want to interview, it can be difficult because he is at home and he has to sleep, or he is not available within the next days. And it is also the situation that the air navigation service providers, they have their own safety system. To communicate with their own safety people, that's normally an easy task. But to communicate with the controllers, to communicate with supervisors, to communicate with the managers, it is a bit more challenging, but it is necessary in some cases, and it is possible. And so I think we should try to do it. As I said before, according to the regulation, according to the standard coming from ICAO 13, it is also very clear in the 996 regulation, which means it is by law, the ANSP must secure ATC recordings without delay, ensure no overwriting or automatic deletion. Provide copies in readable format to investigators. They have to do it, and I can tell you they do it. They do it. And the rights of us as investigators are, we have unrestricted access to all these things. We can do interviews. Back to the Überling, the outcome of the Überling investigation, just as an example. Finally, we had 19 safety recommendations, and 11 of them were directly related to ATC services, ATC procedures, or ANSP organizational deficiencies. Included ATCO staffing, workload, system redundancy, maintenance, and alarm function, TCA in this case, handover procedures, radar communications, supervisor roles, emergency procedures. And you can see there was a need to investigate. If we wouldn't have done this investigation in this way, in this depth, then we wouldn't get this information. And as we all know nowadays from the Überling accident and the aftermath of the Überling accidents, the aviation community, beginning with ICAO and down to the operators, to air navigation service providers, could learn a lot and improve safety. And so, in my understanding, it is really necessary to do it. Finally, the last question I would like to discuss a bit is there a need to have a specialized ATC investigator within the investigation authority? Ideally, the answer would be yes. But in practice, we know that many accident investigation authorities or safety investigation authorities do not have them. Yes, the solution is between both. If the best way is to have one or more full-time ATC investigator, an investigator with an ATC background, or the other way is to get or to have an ATC controller available, but he has to be trained in ICAO 13 investigation methods. And so, yes, there's a need. And if there's no option to have it, what can we do? According to the ICAO Annex 13 system, we can have and we can use advisors from operators and advisors from manufacturers, and also advisors from air navigation service providers. The air navigation service provider staff may help explain system, extract data, clarify procedures. It is possible, but there are limits. And the limits are, it is just possible to get factual information. It is not possible to use people like this for the analyze. This is because of the independency. At the BFU in Germany, the BFU has a system in Germany which is based on, we call it BFU representatives at the air navigation server provider. These are trained people. They know what the BFU would like to have, and they are able to gather factual information, and they transfer this factual information for decision making to the BFU. In our understanding, that is fine. It works very well, but we have to keep in mind that there is a border. And we had to discuss this border with ICAO during the latest user audit. I was in charge for this audit for AIG in Germany, and so I had to discuss it, or I had to discuss the limits of this system with the auditors coming from ICAO, and they accepted it. At the beginning, they didn't accept it, but then they accepted it. And it is important to note that nowadays we will find in document 9756, and ICAO is warned that ANSP personnel may provide factual information, but should not perform evaluating functions. And I think that is really, really important because of the independency. Later on, Daniel Knecht from Switzerland, he will present some examples, and maybe he will explain their system, because their system is, they are asking for an experienced investigator or experienced ATC person with investigation experience from foreign countries. That is possible. It is a bit better than we do it, or how we do it in Germany. It is possible. The most important is to preserve independence. Yes, that's it. And just to conclude it in a very short way, as I said, independent investigation is essential. I believe all of you are familiar with that. ATC involvement is systemic, not incidental. That means if there's a failure in ATC, we have to understand, is there a systemic issue? Then the problem is also for the following flights or for other air navigation service providers or for the aviation system. ATC investigations depend on complete data preservation. Human factors are central, as in every investigation, and the regulatory complexity is a challenge, but it is possible. It is possible, and specialized ATC expertise is highly beneficial. Sometimes we don't have, but in a serious case, in a high-profile case, there's a need to have it. That's it from my side. Thank you very much, and feel free to ask questions.
Excellent, Johan. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. And also, it's interesting to learn that you have correspondence for the BFU at the German ANSP, as I understood. There's a question here from Tony in the UK. I think I've missed it. Where did that go? Let's see. I missed it. I believe Tony was asking about which whether you're aware of any air accident investigation authorities which have dedicated ATC investigators within their staff.
Yes, I know it's always a problem. At BFU, we had it over years, but nowadays BFU has trained ATC investigator with a military background. It is also possible, and the problem to get an ATC controller is for most of the investigation authorities that the payment is different, and it is. On one hand, it is very interesting for a controller to do investigation. On the other hand, payment will play an important role. And so I believe just minor investigation authorities have. NTSB, for example, they have. And I know several investigation authorities, they have trained controllers or controllers trained in accident investigation, but coming from the military. It is possible. It is additional training is necessary, but it is possible.
Understood. And also, one of the things that we discussed, before the focus on is, and you highlighted, is some of the human factors aspects of conducting ATC investigations and having access to data sometimes, but also to the controllers, and also considering that in more recent years, air navigation service providers are formally required now to have a safety management system in place. How do you feel that this can make our life easier? I mean, SMS elements were always Eurocontrol requirements as part of the ESARs, but now, of course, the formal requirement for SMS is in place as part of Part ATS. And so how can this make our life easier, do you think?
Yes, I think it can make our life easier because if they have a SMS system, they have dedicated people who are dealing with safety issues. And they know what we mean by safety. And from our view as an exerting investigator from independent investigation authorities, it is much easier to talk with persons who know what we mean by safety, and just to have, and it is helpful to have a link and a good relationship before an occurrence occurred, to be prepared, and then it will be much easier to communicate with these safety people within the ANSPs. And so, yes, it makes the life for us as investigators easier.
Excellent. Thank you. I see a comment here from Frederick mentioning that at the BEA they have one full-time ATC investigator.
Yes. Okay. A good example. Yes.
Well.
Thank you very
Now,
much.
also, of course, it's very relevant now for many of us as safety investigation authorities. Considering some of the high-profile events that we've had recently, we see that I don't know if it's a growing trend, but certainly it's something that we need to keep a focus on as traffic levels increase in airspace and on the ground as well at airports. And also because we know that when things do go wrong, ATC events normally end up catastrophically. So we need to be aware of the precursors and investigate those in a more proactive way. Okay, I think we're going a little bit over. Johan, thank you very much once again. And I would like to move on to our next presentation. It's from the UK. And it's Mark from the UK AIB. So Mark is a senior engineering inspector. He joined the AIB in 2017. He chairs the UK Tri-Branch Victims and Family Liaison Working Group. He's an accredited investigator in charge and has been involved in over 130 aircraft accident investigations. Before working at the AIB, Mark was chief engineering at Filton at Airbus and focused on the wing systems design at Filton and Toulouse on the A380. So he has extensive engineering experience. He's a chartered engineer, and he has a second job, which I identify with very much myself. He's the dad of two teenagers. I don't have teenagers, but being a job is sometimes like a second full-time job. So over to you, Mark, and thank you very much for speaking to us today.
Great. Thank you, Nuno. And just to echo my fellow presenters, thanks very much indeed for the opportunity to present to everyone today. So a slight sort of change of tack for my presentation. I'm going to present a case study from an AAIB investigation back in 2021, which relates to two air traffic control units assistance to Golf Bravo X-Ray Bravo uniform, a CAP 10B, which was stuck above cloud in the west of England in the summer of 21. So the flight was initiated from a very small farm strip called Watchwood Farm with pilot and one passenger on board. And their intention was to fly down to the Scilly Isles off the coast of Cornwall for lunch. So they departed the airfield at about 7 o'clock in the morning. He did a cursory weather check before he went, but at that time of departure, a lot of the weather information for that part of the country hadn't yet been published. They travelled all the way down, and as they were travelling down over the West Country, the weather got progressively worse. And so by around about 8 o'clock in the morning, the weather had deteriorated such that the pilot decided that the most effective thing that he could do was to turn around and go back home, which they did. So they travelled back along the south coast of England, back towards Exeter. And at around about 9:10 in the morning, the pilot, they were at about 7,500 feet above Watchwood Farm. He was using a tablet with Sky Demon for navigation, so he was fairly confident he knew where he was, but he was at 7,500 feet and stuck above a very thick layer of cloud and couldn't get down. He contacted another local airfield to ask what their weather conditions were via radio, and was told that the weather conditions at that airfield were also not suitable either, and was advised that the best thing that they could probably do is declare emergency on the emergency frequency of 121.5 megahertz to seek assistance, which the pilot duly did. In the UK, we have a slightly different system where on 1215, it is monitored by an RAF air traffic control unit at Swanwick near Southampton. So at 9:11 hours, pilot requested help, declared a pan emergency, so an emergency situation but not requiring urgent assistance, and stated that they were stuck above cloud. He said he needed to divert to somewhere where he could land and was very desperate for help. He confirmed that the aircraft had enough fuel for a further 90 minutes of flight as endurance on board, and was capable of maintaining VFR flight above cloud. Now, at around exactly the same time when this initial contact was being made between D&D and the pilot, there was a simultaneous phone call from another air traffic control unit at Exeter Airport to the D&D cell. Which then started to really muddy the waters in the communication between the two ATC units and the pilot of the aircraft. D&D and Exeter had a very brief conversation, which I'll go into a little bit more, but effectively Exeter said, we'll take him, we'll give him the support he needs to help him land at Exeter Airport. The D&D controller advised the pilot that Exeter were willing to accept him, and the pilot began a descent into cloud prior to making initial contact with Exeter radar. He did make contact with Exeter radar. He restated his emergency status, and Exeter gave him instructions for an approach and landing at their airport. Whilst the pilot was likely flying in cloud with a high workload, he was also only licensed as a visual flight rules pilot on his license. He probably became spatially disorientated and lost control of the aircraft at around 09:18 hours later on, and unfortunately resulted in a fatal accident to the two people on board. So if I focus back a little bit on the interactions between the two ATC units and our pilot on board BXBU, that initial phone call between D&D and Exeter was actually initiated by Exeter radar to the distress and diversion cell. to provide them an update with a military jet that was having a technical issue in the area. Once that update had been given, which, as I say, was a push from Exeter radar to distress and diversion, they then held a very cursory secondary discussion about a GA pilot who had been wandering around over the centre line and effectively getting in the way of this military jet. Neither assistant controller at Exeter nor the support controller at D&D identified themselves as such, and there was an understanding and assumption between both people that they were actually talking to qualified air traffic control officers. And so certain decisions were made. D&D stated that BXBU was stuck above cloud and wanted to divert to another airfield to land. However, nobody at D&D checked on the weather conditions at Exeter before transferring that pilot across to them. The cloud base at Exeter was only broken at 500 feet, and even for an instrument landing approach at Exeter, the minimum decision height is around 750 to 800 feet. And so the weather at Exeter was not great either. There was no full radar handover procedure completed between the two units, and no further information that really was requested by Exeter nor given by D&D. And so Exeter radar controller, who took on BXBU and gave them the subsequent instructions, didn't really understand what qualifications the pilot had, i.e. actually was only qualified to fly VFR. And so then issued ILS vectors, which the pilot, who was under immense mental stress, commercial pilots who were listening in on 1215, which we spoke to as well, confirmed that the pilot was under a lot of stress. We don't know how well his passenger was coping with the situation they were in, but we could certainly tell from the way that the pilot was speaking was that he had run out of ideas. He did not know what to do. And so when offered ILS vectors, he simply said, I can't do that. And so was offered a special radar approach as well, which to a VFR pilot would probably not have meant much at all. However, the pilot did commence that descent into cloud, which unfortunately resulted in a loss of control. So the aircraft was a Cap 10B, two-seat side-by-side wooden aerobatic aircraft, and it was built in the 1980s, in about 1980, and rebuilt in 1994. Had a fairly good fuel endurance on board of around about 4 hours, so it was perfectly capable of making the trip to the Scilly Isles and back. The picture at the bottom of the screen there shows the accident site taken from one of the drones that we put up at the site. And as you can see, it's a very, very long site. It's approximately 200 to 300 meters in length, being that large oak tree was probably the first point of impact, and then with the ground further on. A very, very dispersed accident site. The picture in the top right of the slide is the work that I spent several months afterwards, was laying out all of the wreckage that was recovered from the site, really to ensure that no significant items were missing. Also, I was able to do continuity of flight controls as well, which were verified. All of the damage that I could see from the wreckage that was laid out was that it was all sustained during the impact, and I could find no evidence that the aircraft was uncontrollable at any point during the flight. So the analysis of the accident, we really started to focus on what the pilot had done, and then the interactions between the pilot and D&D, and the pilot and the Exeter ATCU. The pilot, as I mentioned, did not have the opportunity, due to the early time of departure, to really get a good, complete weather assessment. And the weather did turn a lot worse than was expected. Also, he was not one for using a transponder or his radio. Our pilot was typically someone who would fly in Class G airspace with no transponder on, and would not typically get a basic service or any form of air traffic service whilst he was doing his flying. He was known as a fair weather flyer. So his familiarity with ATC services and what services they could provide was pretty scant. We also know that, as I say, at the time when he was stuck above cloud, judging from what he had said to ATC and what was said on the radio, he was under a lot of stress, and his mental capacity was drastically reduced to come up with new and innovative plans for problem solving. In his initial contacts with D&D, the message was very clear. He needed request for help, and it was an emergency. And you can tell by the language that he used, he had abdicated responsibility to an outside organization, to other people to help him. D&D did not make any independent assessment of options. This was done in a very hurried way, as you can tell from the initial declaration of the pan at 09:11, with the accident occurring only 7 minutes later. The timescale that this happened under was very, very short. And when you consider that he had declared in that initial contact that he had 1.5 hours worth of fuel endurance left, it raised a lot of questions as to why these things happened so quickly. So, of course, simultaneously, whilst D&D and the pilot were having their initial contact, there was the conversation going on the telephone between the D&D and Exeter. As I say, the assistants were not aware that each other was not a licensed ATCO. They assumed that they were talking to someone who could make decisions and these sorts of side of things. Exeter offered a solution without really understanding what the problem was. They just assumed that BXBU was a weather diversion. The weather was so bad at the time around the area that they just assumed that there would be no VFR flying being done at that time, and that everybody who was flying would have an IMC rating. There was no formal handovers. There was no drawing of information down and really understanding what capabilities were available to them and assessing. And so that led to a lot of misunderstanding and a very quick response. Between Exeter and the pilot interaction, they just reacted as a weather diversion, despite the fact that D&D had asked the pilot to squawk 7700 on his transponder, which he did, and that was seen on the Exeter radar screen as well. Instrument approaches were offered into Exeter, which, as I said, to a VFR pilot would have been very, very challenging and misunderstood, not being able to do. Actually, as well, BXBU was not equipped with the right instruments on board for the pilot to use to fly instrument approaches either. And we found that there was a lot of, we found checklists were available for the ATC unit to what to do and to what information to collect during an emergency situation, but they were never really used. They were seen as a bit of an aid memoir, something that could be used, but were not something regularly put together. One of the things that we found that was very, very confusing around all of this was D&D, the distress and diversion, this RAF unit of air traffic controllers situated in the National Air Traffic Service Provider in Swanwick, was their interactions. And within some of the documentation around the Manual for Air Traffic Services in the UK, they talk about D&D having executive control in an emergency situation. They could delegate operational control to a relevant ATCU, but they would then retain executive control. And a lot of people during our investigation spoke about these executive control and operational control, but we never actually found a true definition of what this control meant. And also, D&D is born of a time when military search and rescue operations were taken underneath the military. In 2016, that changed, and search and rescue operations are now under part of the UK Coastal Guard provisions instead. But however, distress and diversion have retained a certain amount of involvement in emergency situations. And there are no formal agreements between a military ATC unit and the civil ATC world and how all of this should fit together. So we found lots of barriers were missing, lots of ambiguity, lots of bits and pieces there between these two ATC units acting together in an emergency situation. So the conclusion of our investigation was that the aircraft collided with terrain in bad weather conditions, which had deteriorated beyond the capabilities who was not trained to fly in IMC. The forecasts that were available at the time the pilot assessed the weather, which was very early in the morning, did not really extend the way that the weather had deteriorated through the morning. And why he was stuck above cloud, we never really managed to understand. When the pilot did request assistance in finding an appropriate aerodrome to land at, the level of support was not sufficient to provide the assistance required by the pilot, who was in a state of distress, and ATC's understanding of what it was like for a single pilot with a passenger, GA, who was not used to talking to ATC, what sort of assistance he required. The breakdown in communication and teamwork between the three parties involved led to miscommunication, some incorrect assumptions, and omission of critical information, such the fact that the pilot was only licensed and capable of flying in visual flight conditions. Following published procedures would likely have aided and made this as a better situation. The use of checklists to ascertain certain key information, and would probably have established that actually Exeter was not a suitable diversion. We identified at the time 2 other airports which would have been able to do a VFR landing. Also, the weather cell was moving at the time, and within a time period within the endurance of the aircraft, had the aircraft held above Watford Farm, that home airport, they would have been able to successfully come back and make a VFR approach a short time later. We identified there were some shortcomings in place in the UK on how emergency support was provided to aircraft in emergency situations, and therefore we published 5 safety recommendations to the UK Civil Aviation Authority and 2 to the Department for Transport. So to the Civil Aviation Authority, we published Recommendation 11 in 2023, which was about aiding pilots and their what to do in unexpected weather deterioration and the benefits of planning before a flight. And the CAA have produced webinars and much more training and documentation advice, best practice for GA pilots on deteriorating weather and things that they can do to help themselves. Therefore, that recommendation is now closed. Recommendation 12 was about understanding human factors for air traffic controllers. The current training at the time was that air traffic controllers understood the human factors of other air traffic controllers and what it was like to work within their teams, but they had no real understanding of what, for a single pilot operation, what the human factors for that pilot would be. And so BXBU now is a case study that is included in a lot of air traffic control officer training on that performance characteristics and how to help pilots under stress. That is ongoing as it is not yet fully integrated. Recommendation 13 specified the type of information that air traffic controllers will obtain and record when responding to an aircraft in an emergency. This was very haphazard and there were certain key things which were not obtained. A lot of the air traffic controllers relied on the pilot pushing that information, as in those initial contact scripts that have a lot of GA pilots when they make first contact with an ATCU. But actually, if that information is not offered, the air traffic controllers didn't feel that they could pull that information. And so we wanted to make a recommendation that it should be specified what information they should record. That is also ongoing and procedures are being updated. Recommendation 14 was to encourage the use of checklists when dealing with abnormal events and emergency situations, rather than a sort of an ad hoc approach. ATC units, the ones that we spoke to, they tended to see them as a help. They could be used, but they could also be disregarded, as every situation is difficult. However, for flight crew, checklists really do help free up mental capacity and ensure that things are not missed. And the last recommendation 15, which we passed to the CAA, was around this executive and operational control and what that meant and definitions. MATS Part 1, so the Manual of Air Traffic Services Part 1, has been updated and is currently being changed as well. And the whole section around D&D and understanding their roles and how they work with civilian ATCUs has been changed now. And executive and operational control has been removed so that there is no further any confusion. The 2 recommendations that we gave to the Department for Transport really was to review the provision of emergency communications to see whether a dedicated air traffic control service, i.e. D&D at Swanwick, was really the most effective way to assist civil aviation aircraft in an emergency situation. It is globally unique. No other country in the world uses this model that we have here in the UK. And is it so appropriate to do so? And also that relationship between what D&D should provide as a military unit to civilian air traffic. DFD's review of those both of those recommendations is ongoing and their responses are due to the AIB early next year. The Military Air Traffic Control Unit at Base at Swanwick, the D&D cell, is operated underneath the Military Aviation Authority, and whilst the AIB has no jurisdiction and are outside the scope of our investigations, we did offer the same recommendations which we offer to the CAA, to the MAA for their consideration. And the Military Aviation Authority stated that it intended to address the safety regs 12, 13, 14, and 15 for their own purposes as well. And that is the end of the case study. Willing to take questions if anybody has any.
Mark, excellent presentation. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights on this tragic but very interesting event, and with a lot of safety recommendations, some of which I can see related to something that we investigated here in Portugal a while back. So just before we go into the questions, a quick note to everyone. Early on in the event, we discussed a presentation that was given at ESASI 2017 in Slovenia, given by the BEA on using Flight Radar 24 data. And just a quick note, the link to that presentation is on the chat, but also it is on the new ESASI website, I should say. So you should really check it out for those of you who haven't been there yet. So coming back to the questions very quickly, let's see. I see we have a few here. Excuse me. So I think the first question you referred to was regarding whether VMC options were available somewhere within the endurance of the VFR-only pilot. And the reason for this question is because the accident appears to have happened just minutes after he declared PAN. So whether he had any options within those 90 minutes of fuel still remaining with him.
Yes, we did do a hypothetical study to see whether or not there were other airfields available with weather conducive. And we did find two airports which were further to the north of Watchford Farm, which were in VMC, and the pilot had sufficient fuel to reach at that time. Also, as I stated, the weather front was moving through, and had he flown a racetrack, a whole pattern, or something like that above cloud, within his endurance time of fuel, the weather front would have passed through, and actually he could have made a VFR approach back to Watchford Farm as well. We had CCTV available from a farm nearby, and you could watch the visibility close in, and it was about at the weather's worst when the pilot declared his PAN. And shortly afterwards, it started to lift again. And about half an hour after the event, the weather was actually quite clear and just broken cloud again. So it was a very, very unfortunate timing. And this is really one of the crux that we sort of got to, was that he declared a PAN, which is a non-urgent emergency. And it was just unfortunate timing that this other telephone call came in about something unrelated with this military jet, that seemed to set a whole chain of events very quickly moving. Within 7 or 8 minutes of the PAN being declared, the accident occurred when there was an hour and a half's worth of fuel. So yes, a very, very sad
Tragic set of circumstances. Excellent. Well, are there any other questions for Mark? Let's see. Yeah, no, okay, excellent. Mark, thank you very much once again for taking the time to share this important event with us. Thank you for this presentation. Right, moving on, we have another presenter, this time from Switzerland, and Daniel is an old acquaintance of mine from my time at Embraer, and we know each other, excuse me, for many years. Now, Daniel heads the aviation division of the Swiss Transportation Safety Investigation Board. He holds a master in interdisciplinary natural sciences, so that includes mathematics, physics, and chemistry. And so he served 16 years as a fighter pilot and the squadron commander with the Swiss Air Force. He continues as a military flight instructor in the Air Force on the Pilatus PC-7. He holds an ATPL and has been involved in over 100 accidents. And he's here to talk to us about the 3 S's of collision avoidance. So over to you, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Nuno, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. In the next few minutes, I would like to share with you some insights from findings of about 400 investigations we did into near collisions and mid-air collisions with and without ATC involvement during the last 30 years about. As this has already been covered in great detail by the previous speakers, I will not go into the investigation methods, but would simply like to share with you some practical aspects for prevention purposes. With these examples, I would also like to give you a few pointers as to the areas that an investigation could lead to. Next slide, please, Paula. Thank you. When several serious mid-air collisions between commercial aircraft occurred in the 1950s, various ideas were put forward as to how such collisions could be avoided in future. Click, please. For example, an international pilots association purposed that the flight decks of commercial aircraft could be designed with large windows so that see and avoid was more easily to practice. Well, we all know that the design development was not going in this direction, which brings us to the three important ways of avoiding collisions today. Next slide, please. I would like to cover the 3S of possibilities to avoid collisions: see, sense, and segregate, based on examples, and then sum up with a quick summary. Next slide, please. When it comes to see and avoid, we have still quite a lot of near collisions. We had also some mid-air collisions a few years ago, but at the moment, fortunately, only near collisions between fast-flying fighters of the Swiss Air Force and some slowly moving general aviation traffic, as in this example. From the right side, you have in yellow a section of F5E overtaking, click please, with quite a big relative velocity, an R-44 helicopter. And next slide, please. That's quite common for this kind of events. In this case, you have from the north an IFR traffic which changed flight rules to land on a smaller airfield in the center of Switzerland, and in yellow. And on the right side, you have two F-18 on a low-level flight coming in towards these airfields. They got some traffic information from their flight following service, which is provided by the Air Force. And they even were able to establish radar contact and at the end some visual contact. But click please, because the relative speed was about 550 knots, it was not possible to do a good avoidance maneuver, so the collision was just avoided by chance. That's one problem we have quite a lot. And next slide, please. This is quite often combined with the problem of this limitation of C. You may know all those different studies which different a little bit how many seconds you need to make a sensible reaction. If you take this 12 seconds and the relative speed, you have basically a zone up to 4 kilometers or 2 nautical miles where an avoidance maneuver is just done by chance, or a miss is just a matter of luck and not really possible to achieve by assessing the situation only in looking outside the cockpit. What we can see, especially in general aviation cases, that most of the crews today, they are quite absorbed by the screens and all the information they have inside the cockpit. So scanning outside and also an efficient way to scan the sky, at least in front of the aircraft, is more and more not known or not mastered. And with regard to the Air Force, we have also the problem that they are living a little bit in their own world. There we have to increase their awareness regarding the behavior of the civilian airspace users. And as the Swiss airspace is quite densely used, there is the problem that you have no or almost no separate areas, at least in low-level regions. And there is also the limit of the flight following, which is quite a nice service the Air Force has. But with regard to the terrain, there are some limits with regard to radar coverage and also VHF coverage if they have to provide some information. Next slide, please. On the other hand, if it comes now to purely civil aircraft, mainly in general aviation, we observe quite often the following problem. These were two aircraft equipped with collision avoidance or warning systems. From the south is Diamond DA42, and from the left with a south easterly heading, the Piper PA28. Now the Diamond DA42 had a clear indication with a difference in altitude on the TAS system, and also the information about the lateral position. And then the crew decided to make a right turn. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, this right turn led to a more severe near collision. So that's quite often the case. Next slide, please. That the using, just this point is also with regard to this collision warning system, just to mention it. I'm not sure if this is in every country the same. We are in Switzerland quite often the aircraft, they are equipped with FLARM or power FLARM, as we have a large glider community. But unfortunately, this, I would say, system, which is based on GPS, is not communicating with the transponder world, and there we have quite a lot of incompatibilities. It's also the older transponder without the ADS-B out. They are less performant than the newer ones, and we have still quite a lot of problems, even if the aircraft are equipped with warning systems, that they are not working because of a certain kind of incompatibility. Next slide, please, with the sum up of this point. Sense and avoid, click please, is the problem that at least, or even in the TCAS world until now, the vertical evasive maneuver is possible, and you have even in the TCAS world some resolution advisories. On the other hand, lateral evasive maneuvers, at least in the TAS community or in the TAS systems, are basically not working because depending on the antenna position, on different aspects, you may have a false indication how you have to turn, and that's something we can observe quite in quite a lot of cases. Then on the other hand, the incompatible or missing collision warning systems, they make sense and avoid quite difficult. Next slide. Warnings and notification, that's a thing we have, especially in contact with GA crews. We always observe they think they can rely on those systems and neglect the see and avoid. And on the other hand, you have to say it's something who has to work together. These traffic avoidance systems could improve your situation awareness, but if you rely only on them, then it is not helpful, and you can sense you in a false security. Next slide, please. Another thing we observe quite a lot is that near collisions and collisions, they happen in sunny conditions, in very nice weather conditions, as on this slide here. That was a near collision. Next slide, please. Between a motorized aircraft, single engine piston aircraft, and a paraglider. The biggest community of aircraft users in Switzerland are paragliders. We have almost 20,000 of them using the mountainous areas. So next slide, please. Such near collisions, they happen quite often. That's the photo proof in this case. And on our charts, next slide, please. There are quite a lot of hotspots indicating where you have a lot of concentration of these paragliders. Unfortunately, this is not always taken into account. And with regard to this, quite simply to avoid mid-air collisions or near collisions, next slide, it would be very easy if everybody develops a kind of situation awareness, always thinking what kind of other airspace users can I expect, avoid some hotspots, and for sure carry some functional warning systems. Those paragliders, they use quite often the FLARM system, so they are not used or they are not visible on a transponder based TAS, but at least see and avoid would be quite simple because the relative velocities are quite limited. Next slide, please. Another problem we have with regard to the mixed traffic, that's an example of an IFR training aircraft and two gliders as well. On this day, weather was not too bad. Next slide, please. The situation from the glider, it was possible to fly outside clouds. As you may know, in several countries, gliders have the possibility to fly even into clouds to use some updrafts or so. That was not the case in this situation. Next slide, please. And that was the situation from inside the IFR training aircraft. Why did this near collision happen? Next slide, please. That's the situation from above. In orange, you have a so-called thermal airway, which leads from the northeast to the southwest of the northern part of Switzerland. And that's the traffic with glider aircraft within those 2 or 3 hours when this IFR training was taking place. And no wonder there were two near collisions there. Why is this so easily possible? Next slide, please. We have as an airspace structure which limits the approach, not even from the final approach fix, but only the last part of the approach in airspace class D, and the rest, even next slide, please, with the whole lineup procedure from the holding until the final approach point of the RMP approach is in airspace class Echo. click, please. And there is this caution box there that you have to expect some VFR traffic without radio communication, but that's more or less a legal aspect, and it doesn't help if you are there in an IFR training or in an IFR approach. That's a problem. I think we not only have in Switzerland but in Europe in general, to allow the general aviation or gliders to have quite a lot of airspace where they can move. You have to be aware that IFR procedures are mixed with such VFR traffic. Next slide, please. On the other hand, that may be a typical Swiss problem. We have a so-called low-flying network, which was designed during the few last years to allow HEMS operation and the Air Force to fly low-level IFR. For example, points in space operation for the Air Force, or to fly even in worse meteorological conditions on hospitals or so, and even to cross the Alps in IFR on a low-level flight. Now, this is only approved for special operations, but these points, these navigation points, these waypoints, they are officially introduced in every electronic flight bag. And we have quite a lot of people in general aviation. They use this low flying network to fly, for example, over the Alps. And then, yeah, that's quite helpful if you don't want to navigate using a map and normal navigation means. But the precision of GPS today, if you fly this pass, even guided by an autopilot or so, and you have IFR traffic ahead of you or opposite, then the collision is almost granted. Next slide, please. So if with regard to this mixed airspace, it's very important that you know the probable flight paths of other airspace users. These elephant navigation points, I think it could be a little bit special only for Switzerland. It's clear it's only intended for IFR traffic. And what you have to take into consideration, at least when flying in mountainous areas, that civil air traffic information services, they have only limited access to radar data and also a limited capacity to give you some traffic informations. We have a part of Switzerland which is using now MLAT coverage. That helps a lot, but it's not in the whole country available for general aviation now. And last but not least, basic traffic rules, the large vertical distance from clouds, semicircular rules, etc. They have their importance, even if they stem from most probably the 30s or 40s of the last century. Next slide, please. Another problem we have discovered was a near collision between a glider and an Air Force display team. For this display on a smaller airfield in the northern part of Switzerland, there was a restricted area declared with an amount of time of about 1 hour, where this airspace was just restricted for this display team. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, the whole display team had a near encounter with a glider, which was in this area, which was quite difficult because, as you can imagine, a display team, next slide, please, is quite difficult to maneuver when there is an obstacle in the vicinity. Next slide, please. That's just a snapshot from one of the lipstick cameras of the display team. Now, what was the reason? Next slide, please. The glider was entering Swiss airspace from Germany. the blue trace you can see there, and that was at the time when this restricted area was not active, and he proceeded outside towards the south, turned, and went back, or wanted to fly back to Germany, where he started, and now the display took place. When we talked with the pilot, we detected that there was the problem of available information about this restricted area, and this can even happen with modern information system as electronic flight bags. For example, next slide, please. If you have the daily airspace bulletin, as it may be published in every country in a different way, but basically be available, I would like to attire your attention on two sectors. Click, please. You have there two areas. On the left, it's only a danger area with regard to a balloon competition, and on the right side there is a restricted area with air-to-ground firing of the Air Force in the central part of the Alpine area. Now, if you take next slide, please. An actual electronic flight bag for general aviation, you may see, click please, that the area where this balloon competition takes place has not the same shape. So it's different. And on the other hand, if you look on the right side, it's not so nicely visible, but you can see there is no red space there. And the reason is because this picture was taken just a few minutes before the restricted area became active. Next slide, please. And then a few seconds later, click please, you can detect that the area is now active. It's in red. But the problem is if you have only, for example, this technical item or this information system available for your flight preparation, and then you go flying, you may find yourself just in a restricted area unexpectedly, because the system is not providing you the information before. And that was not in this case the main reason, but the information provided, especially in cross-border flights. Next slide, please. Is very important if you are flying in areas where you have to expect some restricted or danger areas. And I'm not against all those helpful electronic information systems. They are excellent, but they have some limits, and you should know them. Next slide. Another problem we have is the segregation between airspace where you have a lot of of controlled IFR traffic, commercial air traffic, and below, especially some general aviation traffic. In this case, click please, you have a British Airways 320, which was in approach for Zurich, descending to 6,000 feet. And on the other hand, you have from the south a general aviation aircraft, which is later on climbing without clearance into this TMA sector 6 of Zurich Airport. Now, in this case, next click please, it was quite easy to avoid the collision by the SDCA worked, and just a small heading change. Next click please. It was easy to deconflict the situation. But basically, next click, the problem was there that even in nice weather conditions, without the help of the ATC and TCAS, the problem would become much worse. Now, next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. at least in Switzerland, we have quite a lot of airspace violations, depending a little bit on the traffic density as well with regard to the general aviation. There are different zones, but that's a problem we still have. Next click, please. And in Switzerland, this is dependent from the following problem. We have not the 1,000 feet IFR VFR staggering, which is prescribed basically or proposed by ICAO. We have a reduced separation minimum of 500 feet at the lowest part of the airspace Charlie, and that's just to avoid or to allow much more freedom to the general aviation aircraft, but this leads to a lot of airspace violations. We have just made some safety recommendations with regard to this point, but just now, until now, we have still this problem which leads to a lot of airspace violations. Next slide, please. So these small vertical distances, as I mentioned, they are, with regard to general aviation, I would say, an advantage, but they have a lot of responsibility. Today, we also observe that precise navigation is possible with all those GPS-aided systems, quite common in general aviation. But the pilots, the crews, they really have to do a risk assessment. They have to ask themselves how much margin they want to have still if they do a mistake. And the last thing not even covered, we have quite a lot of funny cases where there was no airspace infringement, but for example, aerobatic maneuvers below with high climb rates to the airspace boundary, which caused some resolution advisories, which are a little bit disturbing, but not dangerous at all. Next slide, please. Another problem we have with airspace rules, for example, when it comes to transponder mandatory zones, and you can see this problem just on this slide. These transponder mandatory zones are quite common in Germany since a long time ago. We have only one in Switzerland now, but unfortunately, when we introduced it in Switzerland, we didn't copy the same rules as Germany used. And you can see this on this border to Germany. In Germany, you have to put on the code 2677 and maintain the frequency 119.925, which is the IFR frequency, the feeder frequency for Friedrichshafen, St. Gallen, Altenrhein, and all those aerodromes in the northeastern part of Switzerland and southern part of Germany. On the Swiss side, you can see there is this possibility. You can switch on code 2677 at the same frequency, or you can choose to put the code 7000 and have any other frequency you want. And in this case, exactly this regulation or this freedom in choosing whatever you want led to the problem. You had this IFR traffic on an ILS approach to Friedrichshafen runway 06, and on the other hand, departing VFR traffic from St. Gallen Altenrhein and heading to the northwest. And this traffic, this VFR traffic, when leaving the CTR of St. Gallen Altenrhein, they just decided to put on this code 7000 and flying above the CTR of Friedrichshafen, and they were not attainable by the IFR frequency, which could have. They had about 2 minutes time left to ensure the separation, and this was not possible as they were not on the same frequency. Next slide. So different communication rules. That's only one example of many. In the same airspace, they gave always a lot of problem. If you have this system with voluntary listening, it should be on the same frequency, and if it's necessary, the different crews, they should be available, and then you can or ATC can help them. What we also observe is that this listening squad concept is not so well understood by the crews. They talk a lot when it's not necessary, but they are not on the correct frequency. And in this case, there were also the rules in the IP, they were not correct, or they didn't cover all the cases. Next slide. Now, just to finish, one last mid-air collision, which is typically no see, no sense, and no segregate between a DR 400 and an ISV 27. This picture was taken from one of the passengers in the DR 400 just a few seconds before the collision. Once again, nice weather. Next picture. And the two aircraft. Next picture, please. They were coming from different areas. Basically, it would have been possible to see each other because the velocities were not too fast. What was quite special, this was on a Saturday evening, and what we knew at this time was that the ASV 27, the glider airplane, had an accident in this area. Next slide, please. And on Sunday, we started the recovery operation of this accident. And during this recovery operation, next slide, next click, please. We just discovered the other aircraft, which was not missing until this time, with 4 fatalities. And that's a problem we have observed quite a lot of time after mid-air collisions, that search and rescue was hindered because no traces were there. There is no obligation in Switzerland to file an ATC flight plan if you are only flying VFR. Next slide, please. So in this area, it's clear using transponders carrying functional warning system, which was the case here. Both aircraft had some functional warning systems, but they were not compatible in one case, and in the other case not switched on. And radio contact with information service would have helped. This was also not used in this case, and see and avoid would have been possible. It's a thing we always encourage crews or pilots of general aviation aircraft to also use their passengers, not only take pictures, but also scanning for other aircraft. And search and rescue, as I've already mentioned, it can be a problem if you don't leave some traces. Now, just to sum up, next slide, please. Some statistics, that's in red. You can see the cases we have investigated with high risk. And there is quite an interesting development with regards to the Henrich ratio or Dupont pyramid, or however you want to call it. It is not so surprising that, click please, exactly where you had this, I would say, a lot of these cases that you had the collision of Überlingen. This black star represents this collision. And unfortunately, these investigations before into serious incidents, into high risk near misses, also brought up some problems which were important then in the collision of Überlingen. They were too expensive at the time and the safety recommendations were not followed. A few days after Überlingen, it was done. That was quite a sad experience. On the other hand, we have now, since about 10 years, we have the obligation also to investigate those general aviation cases in the mixed airspace, and there is still this problem there. On the other hand, next click please. All those black stars represent some real mid-air collisions we had in Switzerland during the last 25 years. And the average, next click here, please, is quite high. About 0.7 collisions per year. Basically, I would say, fortunately, mainly only general aviation. But with regard to the statistical data, next slide, please. We have to say that we have some challenges with no foreseeable solution with regard to, next click please, C. It remains important, but it is insufficient, especially if you have high relative velocities. Then, next click please. Sense has the problem that we have quite a lot of incompatible systems. We have still no transponder requirements for all aircraft, and at least in Switzerland, but I think it's a little bit a problem in all Europe, ADS-B ground stations are not used in the same way as, for example, in the United States. Next click, please. Segregate, that's, I think, a problem which is most probably a little bit related to Switzerland. We have a quite complicated airspace structure, and the airspace is used in a very dense way. So basically, next click, please. We have to expect some, next click, collisions between general aviation aircraft and general aviation aircraft, but unfortunately, the statistical probability is quite high. Next click, also for commercial aircraft and general aviation aircraft, especially in the mixed airspace, and last but not least, next click, also between fast flying Air Force aircraft and general aviation aircraft. Yeah, that's basically all. If you have some questions, I will be happy to answer them. And otherwise, thank you for your attention.
Daniel, thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation, for offering so many examples of different types of events, all of them centered around the three S's and highlighting the vulnerabilities of CN Avoid. I mean, even when you have the GA aircraft involved, the closure rates are often offer so little time to react, to detect, to react, and to avoid the collision, right? I mean, I refer to this because some time ago I was reviewing a paper produced in the United States, which was comparing a Cessna and a Boeing 727 and analyzing their different aspect ratios, depending on the perspective, depending from different angle that they were approaching each other. And it was a theoretical analysis of the closure times between the two aircraft, and really it demonstrated how vulnerable the concept of CN Avoid exists, and you have shown this, of course, in your presentation. Now, one of the questions I had for you, we don't have any questions in the chat, but I know that in Switzerland you have investigated a lot of events involving VFR infringing on IFR traffic and even infringing in controlled airspace. And I seem to recall that you did some work with the aero clubs in the past.
Yep.
Have you seen any practical effects of that? I mean, I know that a lot of the people involved in GA flying, and also especially gliders and paragliders, they are very defensive and value the freedom of their activity. Has this awareness effort that you have tried to do with the Aero Club brought any fruits from what you can tell?
Yeah, for example, about 10 to 15 years ago, we had quite a lot of people from general aviation which had a lot of problem in understanding flying in Class D airspace, mixed IFR, VFR traffic. So, for example, they always thought that air traffic control will provide some separation, which is not the case according to the rules. And there we did some quite a lot of work together with the FOCA, with the Oversight Authority, and also with the Aero Clubs. And today we have really less of this kind of problems. No, I think it's as you mentioned, they have their own point of view, and I think a safety investigation authority has to be neutral. They have to take into consideration the needs of the commercial aircraft, the Air Force, and also general aviation. But basically, it is worth to have a good contact, to have the discussion, to have they at the table, and to look for solution together with them. We made quite a lot of positive experiences, and the other thing you mentioned, that's clear. That's also the case that they try to have a much gain for their own purposes. That's clear.
Excellent. Well, Daniel, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us
It was a
today
pleasure.
and for taking the time to give us so many useful examples that we can also use in our work. Excellent. Right. So again, I would like to just thank all of our presenters once again. So my thanks to Ian, Johan, Mark, and Daniel for all the participants. We had over 100 participants from across the world. And also I have to thank our technical committee at ESASI who did a phenomenal job of putting everything together. Thorkel Augustin, Kate Fitzgerald, Paula Dugdale, Arben Dika, and Robert Carter. And also the valuable support of in terms of IT as well from our friends at the AIB in terms of the website and everything else and the support that we've received from them over the years. Now, I should say that ISASI will be back in May 2020. ISASI will be back in May 2026. The ISASI seminar will be held in Dubrovnik on the 20th and 21st of May. And very soon we will start looking for presentations and we'll start putting the program together. So if you have interesting case studies, as we have seen today, and this is really our core business in terms of safety investigation, we can learn very much from each other. If you have interesting case studies, please do consider reaching out to us. And also we will be announcing a call for presentations very soon. The recording from this event will also be made available on our website. And we've gone a bit over our time. A final thanks to everyone who contributed to this focus on ATC events. I hope you found it useful and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and I hope to see you next time. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Nuno.